The automatic doors of Harbor Ridge Medical Center slid open just before sunrise, and nobody looked twice at the woman carrying a single worn duffel bag. She walked with quiet confidence, her navy scrubs perfectly pressed, her badge still so new the plastic reflected every ceiling light. The name read, Emily Carter, registered nurse. To everyone passing by, she looked young, almost too young, and painfully ordinary. The security guard nodded without interest. Two nurses whispered as she crossed the lobby. Another new graduate, one muttered. She'll probably quit after her first trauma shift, the other replied with a laugh. Emily heard every word, yet her expression never changed. She had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than arguments ever could. The emergency department never waited for introductions. Phones rang endlessly, stretchers rolled across polished floors, and exhausted staff hurried between rooms already overflowing with patients. Charge nurse Linda Brooks barely glanced up from her clipboard. Emily? Yes, ma'am. Orientation is supposed to make people comfortable, but we're short 3 nurses today. You'll shadow someone for an hour, then you're on your own with low acuity patients. Don't slow anyone down. I understand. Linda looked surprised by the calm response. You've worked emergency before? A little, Linda repeated with a skeptical smile. We'll see. Emily accepted the assignment without another word. Throughout the morning she cleaned wounds, comforted frightened children, started IV lines with remarkable precision, and answered every question with quiet professionalism. Patients smiled at her, families thanked her, but inside the staff lounge, opinions never changed. She's too calm, one nurse whispered. Either she's pretending, or she's terrified. I heard she transferred from overseas, probably worked in some tiny clinic. Emily entered, just as the conversation ended. The room fell silent. Someone forced an awkward smile. So, where did you work before? Emily poured herself a cup of coffee. Different places. Like where? Mostly hospitals. The answer frustrated everyone. Before anyone could continue, an overhead announcement echoed through the department. Trauma team prepare. Incoming multiple vehicle collision. ETA 3 minutes. The relaxed atmosphere vanished instantly. Doctors sprinted toward the trauma bays. Respiratory therapists prepared ventilators. Nurses rushed for emergency medications. Emily quietly stepped aside, assuming she would not be needed. Linda pointed toward another hallway. You stay with the observation patients. Don't come into Trauma 1 unless someone asks. Emily nodded. Outside, sirens screamed closer. The ambulance doors burst open. Paramedics rushed inside, surrounding a muscular man covered in blood. 34-year-old male. One shouted. United States Marine. High-speed rollover after avoiding a school bus. Massive chest trauma. Blood pressure crashing. The trauma room exploded into organized chaos. Dr. Nathan Hayes, the hospital's respected trauma surgeon, immediately took command. Chest tube. Massive transfusion protocol. Prepare for emergency thoracotomy if necessary. Monitors beeped wildly. The Marine's pulse weakened. His breathing became shallow. His dog tag swung against his blood-soaked chest as nurses cut away his uniform. Emily remained outside the doorway, silently watching. Everything changed in less than 10 seconds. The cardiac monitor emitted one long, terrifying tone. Flatline. He's coding. Someone yelled. Start compressions. The room became frantic. Chest compressions began immediately. Medication followed. Another physician attempted airway management. Nothing worked. 2 minutes passed. Then 4. Dr. Hayes stared at the monitor. No response. Another round of epinephrine. Still nothing. Sweat rolled down every face inside the room. One nurse whispered, We're losing him. Dr. Hayes clenched his jaw. Again. Another cycle. No heartbeat. Outside the room, Emily noticed something everyone else had missed. The Marine's neck veins. The uneven movement beneath his ribs. The subtle shift in his chest after every compression. Her eyes narrowed. She stepped forward. Linda blocked the doorway. What are you doing? He has cardiac tamponade. Linda frowned. The surgeons know what they're doing. Emily didn't move. His heart isn't failing because of electrical activity. Linda crossed her arms. This isn't your patient. Emily looked directly into her eyes. If nobody relieves the pressure around his heart, he'll die. Before Linda could answer, another physician walked out shaking his head. We're almost out of options. Emily took one step into the trauma bay. Dr. Hayes looked up, visibly irritated. "Nurse, get back outside." "Doctor," I said outside. Emily didn't flinch. "He's bleeding into the pericardial sac. We know his injuries." "No," she replied quietly. "You suspect them." The room fell silent. Dr. Hayes stared at her. "You've been here half a day." "Yes." "And you're questioning my diagnosis?" "I'm questioning the timing." Several nurses exchanged uncomfortable looks. One whispered, "This is unbelievable." Dr. Hayes folded his arms. "Explain." Emily pointed toward the ultrasound still resting beside the bed. "No repeat scan after the blood pressure collapsed." The physician operating the machine hesitated. "We haven't repeated it," Emily continued. "The initial scan was before transport deterioration. His condition changed." Dr. Hayes glanced toward the monitor. Seconds felt painfully long. Finally he nodded once. "Repeat the ultrasound." The probe touched the Marine's chest. Everyone watched the screen. Silence spread through the room. Dark fluid surrounded the heart. Far more than before. The physician's face turned pale. "Oh my God." Dr. Hayes stepped closer. "That's impossible." Emily spoke softly. "It's tamponade." The Marine's heart wasn't dead. It was trapped. For the first time that morning, every person in the trauma bay looked at the quiet new nurse with something other than doubt. No one knew yet why she had recognized the condition so quickly. No one knew why she hadn't panicked. No one knew that years before anyone had ever called her Nurse Carter, she had stood beneath the sound of helicopter blades on distant battlefields, performing emergency chest surgeries with bullets flying overhead. But in the next few moments, as one Marine hovered between life and death, the greatest secret of her past was about to change every opinion inside Harbor Ridge Medical Center forever. Dr. Nathan Hayes didn't waste another second. Prep for an emergency pericardiotomy. Now, the room erupted into motion again, but this time the energy was different. It wasn't panic anymore. It was hope mixed with disbelief. Linda hurried to gather sterile instruments while another nurse pushed the ultrasound machine closer. Hayes glanced at Emily. "You've seen this before?" Emily answered without hesitation. "More times than I ever wanted to." Her voice carried no pride, only memory. The Marine's monitor remained almost flat, showing only scattered electrical activity. His blood pressure was nearly unreadable. "Scalpel." Hayes reached for the blade, but his hand paused for the briefest moment. The ultrasound image kept replaying in his mind. Emily quietly spoke again. "The incision needs to be slightly lower. The fluid has shifted." Hayes looked at her, irritation fighting against reason. "You certain?" "Yes." For a split second, nobody breathed. Then Hayes adjusted his position exactly as she suggested. The incision was made. Dark blood burst from the pericardial sac. Instantly, the pressure around the Marine's heart began to ease. Everyone stared at the monitor. One weak beat. Another. Then another. The long, flat tone disappeared. A fragile rhythm returned. "I've got a pulse," shouted one of the nurses. The room froze. Then every person moved twice as fast. "Continue transfusion." Pressures climbing. Ventilation improving. The Marine wasn't safe yet, but he was alive. Hayes stepped back, his gloves stained red, unable to hide his shock. He slowly turned toward Emily. "How did you know?" Emily simply replied, "His body was telling us." No one spoke. The answer sounded too simple for something that had just saved a man's life. An hour later, the Marine was finally stabilized and rushed toward surgery for definitive repair. As the operating room doors closed, the emergency department released a collective breath. Linda found Emily quietly restocking supplies as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "You just saved him." Emily kept organizing syringes. "The whole team saved him." "No," Linda said softly. "You saw what none of us saw." Emily smiled politely. "We all miss things sometimes." Linda wanted to ask more, but another trauma alert interrupted the conversation. The hospital returned to its usual rhythm, yet whispers followed Emily through every hallway. Who is she? How did she recognize tamponade that fast? Was she a military nurse? Maybe she worked at a level 1 trauma center. Nobody had an answer. Even Dr. Hayes couldn't stop thinking about it. Late that afternoon, he walked into the Human Resources office. "I need the employment file for Emily Carter." The administrator frowned. That's confidential. I'm her supervising physician. She hesitated before sliding over a folder. Hayes expected an ordinary resume. Instead, the first page made him blink. Registered nurse, critical care certification, trauma nursing certification, flight nursing qualification. Then he turned another page. His expression changed completely. Several sections were heavily redacted. Employment locations were missing. Entire years had been blacked out. Only one sentence remained visible near the bottom. Attached to international military medical operations. Hayes frowned. What exactly does that mean? The administrator shrugged. That's all we received. There has to be more. There isn't. He closed the file, more confused than before. Meanwhile, Emily sat alone outside the hospital during her short break. She held a small silver military challenge coin in her hand. Its edges were scratched from years of use. Across the front was the faded emblem of a Marine Expeditionary Unit. She rubbed her thumb across it before slipping it back into her pocket. A familiar sound drifted across the parking lot. A helicopter. For just a moment, her breathing changed. The spinning blades pulled her mind somewhere thousands of miles away. Dust, smoke, explosions. A field hospital filled with wounded soldiers. A young combat medic screaming for more blood. A surgeon shouting over gunfire. Emily closing an open chest with trembling hands while rockets landed nearby. Then, silence. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. Emily? She looked up. It was Linda. I've been looking everywhere. Emily stood. Is something wrong? The Marine's commanding officer is here. So? He wants to meet the nurse who helped save his man's life. Emily immediately shook her head. There were plenty of people involved. He asked for you specifically. I'd rather not. Linda studied her face. You really don't like attention, do you? Emily forced a small smile. I came here to work. Before Linda could respond, another code alarm echoed through the building. Both women ran back inside. The intensive care unit had erupted into chaos. The Marine's condition had suddenly deteriorated after surgery. Internal bleeding, falling pressure, rapid blood loss. The surgical team raced to control it. Outside the operating room, a group of Marines stood silently in full uniform. Among them was a gray-haired colonel with rows of ribbons across his chest. His expression remained calm, but his eyes revealed fear. As Emily passed, he looked directly at her. Are you Nurse Carter? She stopped. Yes, sir. He extended his hand. I've been told you refused credit. It wasn't mine to take. The colonel nodded slowly. That's exactly what I expected. Emily looked surprised. Have we met? He smiled faintly. I don't think you remember me. She searched his face. Nothing. The colonel reached into his wallet. From inside, he removed an old photograph. The edges were worn. The colors had faded. It showed a military field hospital somewhere in the desert. Several exhausted medics stood together after a long mission. Emily's eyes widened. She recognized herself immediately. Only she looked completely different. Her uniform was camouflage instead of navy blue. Her face was younger, covered in dust. There was dried blood across both sleeves. Standing beside her in the photograph was the same colonel, only years younger. You, Emily whispered. You pulled shrapnel out of my chest while mortar rounds were falling around us, the colonel said quietly. You kept me alive long enough to reach surgery. The hallway fell silent. Linda, Dr. Hayes, and several nurses had unknowingly gathered nearby. None of them moved. The colonel continued. Back then, everyone knew your name. He looked around at the stunned hospital staff. But I suppose none of them know who you really are. Emily lowered her eyes. I'd rather they didn't. The colonel smiled with unmistakable respect. I'm afraid that stopped being possible the moment you saved another Marine today. Every person in the hallway stared at the quiet new nurse. For the first time, they realized she hadn't simply witnessed trauma. She had lived through it. And whatever secrets remained buried in her past, they were far greater than anyone inside Harbor Ridge Medical Center had ever imagined. The operating room doors finally opened nearly 3 hours later. Every conversation in the hallway stopped. Dr. Hayes stepped out first, exhausted, his surgical cap damp with sweat. Behind him came the anesthesiologist, then 2 nurses pushing the Marine toward the intensive care unit. The monitor beside the bed displayed a steady heartbeat. Weak, but steady. He's going to make it, Hayes said. A wave of relief swept through the waiting Marines. The gray-haired colonel closed his eyes for a brief moment before turning toward Emily. "You've saved another one." Emily looked through the ICU window as the Marine disappeared inside. "He saved himself," she replied quietly. "He never gave up." The colonel smiled. "That's something combat medics always say." By now, nearly every member of the emergency department had gathered nearby. The whispers from earlier were gone. No one laughed anymore. No one questioned why the quiet new nurse seemed so calm under impossible pressure. Linda finally asked the question everyone had been carrying all day. "Emily, who were you before you came here?" Emily was silent for several seconds. "I was a nurse." Hayes gave a tired smile. "No." He shook his head. "You were much more than that." The colonel answered for her. "She wasn't just a nurse." He looked around the room before continuing. "She served with forward surgical teams attached to Marine expeditionary units. Most people in hospitals never see one critical trauma in a week. She sometimes saw 30 before sunrise. The hallway became completely still. She worked so close to the front lines that helicopters often landed before the shooting stopped." One of the younger nurses whispered, "That's impossible." The colonel gently shook his head. "I wish it were." He looked back at Emily. "There was a saying among our Marines." Emily immediately interrupted. "You don't have to." "I do." He smiled. When soldiers saw her walking toward the casualty tents, they stopped worrying. They believed if Nurse Carter reached them before they lost consciousness, they were going home. Several nurses lowered their eyes. Only hours earlier they had dismissed her as inexperienced. Hayes looked genuinely humbled. "You never mentioned any of this." Emily answered honestly. "I wasn't hired because of my past. Why leave?" That question lingered in the air. Emily finally spoke. "Because eventually, every battlefield follows you home." No one asked her to explain. They could see the answer in her eyes. The memories had never really left. The following morning, the Marine regained consciousness. His first words were barely audible. "Did we make it?" The ICU nurse smiled. "You did." He looked confused. "I remember someone saying my heart was trapped." The nurse nodded. "Someone figured it out just in time." A few minutes later, Emily quietly entered the room to check his IV lines. The Marine looked at her for a long moment. "Were you there?" "Yes." "You saved me." Emily adjusted the monitor. "A lot of people worked very hard." He slowly shook his head. "I've seen that look before." She paused. "What look?" "The look people get after they've already seen war." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, the Marine reached beneath his blanket and removed one of his spare military challenge coins from the bedside table. "My commanding officer said heroes never keep score." He placed the coin into Emily's hand. "But sometimes they deserve to be remembered." Emily stared at the coin without speaking. For years, she had carried memories that felt heavier than medals. This one felt different. It wasn't a reminder of loss. It was proof that someone had been given another chance to live. Over the following weeks, Harbor Ridge Medical Center quietly changed. New nurses stopped judging unfamiliar faces. Senior physicians became more willing to listen before dismissing unexpected ideas. Morning briefings became conversations instead of lectures. Dr. Hayes even introduced a new policy encouraging every member of the trauma team, regardless of title or experience, to speak up if they noticed something others had missed. He named it the Carter Principle. Emily objected immediately. "Please don't." Hayes smiled. Too late. Months later, another difficult trauma arrived. A young resident hesitated before questioning a diagnosis. Instead of being ignored, he was heard. His observation saved another patient's life. Afterward, he approached Emily. "I only spoke because of what happened with the Marine." Emily smiled. "Then you were the one who saved the patient." One rainy evening, as her shift finally ended, Emily walked toward the hospital entrance, carrying the same worn duffel bag she had brought on her first day. The security guard stopped her. "I almost forgot." He reached beneath the desk and handed her a small envelope. There wasn't any name on it. Emily opened it outside beneath the hospital lights. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, "Thank you for giving my husband the chance to come home to our children." There was no signature. Only a family photograph. The Marine stood smiling beside his wife. Between them were two young daughters, both wearing oversized camouflage jackets and laughing into the camera. Emily looked at the picture for a long time. Then she quietly folded it and placed it beside the old challenge coin in her bag. For the first time in years, the memories of war were joined by something stronger than pain: hope. People often believe heroes announce themselves with confidence, medals, or applause, but the greatest heroes rarely do. Sometimes they arrive carrying a worn duffel bag. Sometimes they wear a badge that simply says, "Nurse." Sometimes they allow others to underestimate them because they have nothing left to prove. And when the moment comes, they don't step forward for recognition. They step forward because someone's life depends on it. Long after the headlines fade and the uniforms are folded away, true courage remains unchanged. It lives in quiet choices, in steady hands, in calm voices during impossible moments, in ordinary people carrying extraordinary stories that the world may never fully know. So the next time you meet someone who seems quiet, inexperienced, or easily overlooked, remember Emily Carter. You never know what battles someone has already survived, or whose life they may one day save. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that courage is often hidden behind humility, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable stories of hope, sacrifice, and the heroes who quietly change the world, one life at a time.